Bonjour tout le monde. Hi, everybody. I have just finished a meeting with Minister Barrot, the Foreign Minister of France. This follows on my meeting with UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy yesterday. This afternoon, I am pleased to provide you with an update on both visits. And generally speaking, the topics that I raised with each of the foreign ministers related to Canada's economic interests and ties. This morning we discussed Canada's deep ties with France. Minister Barrot and I also discussed security and defense issues, certainly in advance of the NATO summit that is upcoming, as well as the G7 meeting next week in Canada. And we also discussed Ukraine and the issues relating to Ukraine's support and security in the short and the long term. Donc, en français, ce matin, j'ai rencontré mon homologue ici en France, le ministre Barrot. Nous avons discuté les matières de sécurité et défense, aussi nos proches relations économiques et les relations aussi que nous devons continuer avec Ukraine, le soutien pour Ukraine et comment est-ce que nous pouvons ensemble travailler pour l'avenir de l'Ukraine et la sécurité et paix dans le monde en général. Donc avec ça, je pourrais recevoir vos questions.
All right, just a reminder for people joining us online to use the raise hand function if you have a question. C'est un rappel pour les gens qui nous joignent en ligne d'utiliser la fonction main levée si vous avez une question. Nous allons débuter avec Inès Lombardo de Franco Presse. Inès, la parole est à toi.
Merci beaucoup, Eric. Bonjour, Madame la Ministre. Merci de prendre nos questions. Écoutez, je suis un petit peu surprise donc vous mentionnez l'Ukraine, je comprends. Par contre, il n'y a aucune mention des mesures concrètes que le Canada devait prendre avec la France et la Grande-Bretagne, justement, concernant Gaza. Alors, est-ce que oui ou non, vous allez prendre des mesures concrètes pour Gaza?
Premièrement, comme vous savez, nous avons signé un document, une déclaration avec les deux pays la semaine passée. Nous avons bien sûr discuté les mesures nécessaires. Nous sommes d'accord que c'est nécessaire d'avoir une cessez-le-feu pour les Israéliens et les Palestiniens. C'est nécessaire aussi de continuer l'aide humanitaire, y compris la nourriture. C'est nécessaire d'avoir les otages. Les otages doivent être libres et aussi une solution à deux États pour les pays est nécessaire, mais aussi la dignité, la paix pour les Israéliens et les Palestiniens sont nécessaires aussi. Donc, la souffrance dans la région est intolérable et bien sûr, nous sommes en accord avec ça.
En suivi, je comprends donc qu'il n'y aura pas de mesures concrètes là aujourd'hui que vous allez annoncer, c'est bien ça? C'est oui ou non la réponse?
Nous n'avons pas quelque chose pour annoncer aujourd'hui, ça c'est vrai, mais c'est aussi nécessaire de mentionner que c'est une matière que le gouvernement prend très au sérieux et nous maintenant considérons les enjeux nécessaires et nous continuons de faire le travail nécessaire là-dessus.
Mais quand est-ce qu'on pourrait voir des mesures? Parce qu'il y a vraiment des vies d'enfants, de familles qui sont en jeu là, tout de suite, si le Canada ne fait rien.
Ah, excusez-moi, je suis en accord. Le niveau de souffrance dans la région est intolérable. Il faut un cessez-le-feu immédiat. L'aide humanitaire, y compris la nourriture, doit être entrée à Gaza. Les otages détenus depuis le 7 octobre doivent être livrés, ça c'est clair. Et une solution à deux États est nécessaire aussi. En même temps, nous avons signé la déclaration déjà pour la nourriture et aussi on va considérer les autres mesures et ça, c'est une matière en considération dans le gouvernement du Canada à ce moment-là. Merci.
Toria Isri from Global News, you have the floor.
Hi, Minister Anand. Just hoping you can answer a similar question to my colleague, but in English, just if we can expect any concrete action, which was, one of the warnings laid out in that joint statement from Canada since the military offensive in Gaza has not halted.
So the situation in the region is intolerable in terms of the human suffering across the board and the suffering of civilians. And ensuring security and peace in the region does require an immediate return to a ceasefire. The hostages need to be released, and Hamas can have no future in Gaza. The humanitarian assistance, which was the subject of our previous declaration with France and with the United Kingdom, is absolutely crucial as well, especially as that assistance relates to food. And Canada is going to continue to work with our allies in order to ensure the dignity and security of Israelis and Palestinians in general.
Switching gears to or Canada's decision rather to invite Mr. Modi here. You had said yesterday that the safety and security of all Canadians is a priority, but sick Canadians feel like their safety and security, or many rather, is not being taken seriously, and that this invite signals foreign powers are allowed to act with impunity in Canada. So, what do you say to those Canadians who are quite disturbed by this invitation?
The first and most important point is that there is an investigation that is ongoing by the RCMP. The government of Canada has no role in that investigation because it is independent, and that investigation will and should continue because the rule of law should not and cannot be compromised in this country, period. That is clear. At the same time, the Prime Minister has invited Prime Minister Modi in recognition of the fact that this is the meeting of the G7 where global leaders are meeting to discuss global issues, including the global economy. The fact that leaders from a number of countries have been invited to this meeting does not and should not detract from the importance of the independent investigation that is ongoing and the rule of law considerations, which are absolutely paramount. And the government of Canada will not undermine that independent investigation and wishes for it to continue as it must.
Following up with Dylan Robertson from the Canadian Press.
Hi, Minister. Congratulations on your new role, and thanks so much for taking our questions. I'd like to ask a bit more about the guests for the G7, specifically how Canada is choosing them. I know there's not an official announcement on all of the guests, but could you tell us about whether this is about countries you're trying to pull tighter to Canada, or if it's about countries that we're trying to, resolve differences, find common ground, or if it's more about issues? Could you just kind of walk through the thinking for all of the guests that we're going to be bringing to the G7 by invitation?
So the G7 leaders are meeting to discuss a host of issues, including security and defense, including economic issues, including Ukraine, and the invitations over and above the members of the G7 that are being issued are at the discretion of the Prime Minister himself and his office, and he will make decisions about who is being invited. But I will say, in general, on those and other topics, the meeting will allow global leaders to discuss issues of global concern, which is the general purpose of this meeting. And we are honored to be able to invite leaders to our country, and the Prime Minister will be hosting these leaders for a discussion of very serious issues that affect the global economy and the geostrategic environment. And I know that he looks forward to hosting the leaders in just over a week's time.
Thank you. And also about India, with the press release from the Prime Minister's office yesterday, it talked about how there is an agreement with India for continued law enforcement dialogue and discussions addressing security concerns. And I'm curious what you can say about this. Is this a specific mechanism being launched with India, or perhaps a more informal agreement to have these talks? How do you see this sort of working? Is this sort of, to have these talks in a structured way instead of having it overwhelm the bilateral relationship? And just generally your hope for this relationship with India under having this dialogue happen?
So I was not on the call, but I do know that issues of security and the rule of law within our country are extremely important to the Prime Minister. And in terms of the specifics of the items that you mentioned, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on that private conversation between the two leaders.
I don't see any raised hands. Oh, Dylan, you want a last question?
Sorry, I was just going to say, sorry, James here. This will have to be the last round if anyone else wants to go.
Sure. Sorry, I have one question. I always have more questions, and not a follow-up. Perhaps someone else can take that. I'd also just like to know about the Israel-Palestine policy. Since your statement that Israel is using food as a weapon, I'm wondering how you would characterize what Israel's been doing. What are the positive steps? What are the negative steps towards peace? And how is that going to inform our approach to the United Nations vote later this month, the meeting regarding Palestinian statehood?
So the most important points that I want to reiterate are that a ceasefire is necessary. Hostages need to be released. Hamas can have no role in the future of Gaza. A two-state solution that brings peace and dignity to both Palestinians and Israelis is absolutely fundamental. And in that context, it is necessary for food to humanitarian aid writ large to be able to flow. And that was the purpose behind the declaration that we made as countries over 3 weeks ago. That is the general frame. And in addition to that, our countries are considering next steps. Thank you.
We'll go. You have time for one last question, Minister?
Sorry, we got to get to the phone. Very sorry. Thank you
All right. Well, this will conclude our press conference. Thank you for your time today, Minister. Thank you for taking our questions.